All right. So again, thank you very much for the invitation. Today, we would like to give a small workshop on the ARC toolbox. So the ARC, as we know, it creates artificial languages with rhythmicity controls. And in this session, I would like to first give reasons why we have developed this toolbox, which is namely to create confound-free artificial languages for statistical learning. And in the second part, Nikola will give a workshop on how you can actually use the toolbox to generate artificial languages from scratch, or even to diagnose existing stimuli on the levels of the several confounds that we analyze. So as a brief recap and posing the problem on artificial language learning, what we typically ask as a question is how could humans segment speech and learn new words when speech is presented to us as a continuous stream of syllables. And of course, this is a non-trivial question, because if we look at the speech envelope, there is no reliable acoustic marking for word boundaries. However, we do have some statistical regularities in speech, which could be represented as transitional probabilities. So these statistical dependencies between syllables can be informative of word boundaries, because TPs tend to be higher for syllables within words than across words. So Safran and colleagues have developed a paradigm now to essentially demonstrate that infants and adults also can learn from these transitional probabilities. And by manipulating transitional probabilities in such a way that triplets of syllables can form artificial pseudo words, they have shown that indeed these pseudo words can be learned. Now, follow-up neuroimaging studies have used the so-called frequency tagging paradigm, in which all of these syllables have been synthesized and edited to have the same duration. And when that happens, the stream will have essentially energy at the rate of syllables. Now, when we look at the brain activity, we see that there is indeed a peak in the brain response at the syllable frequency, but also a peak at the word frequency. And what it means is that the brain essentially entrains the syllables, but also tracks these pseudo words. So we would hypothesize now that this word frequency peak is due to the TP manipulation. However, how can we be exactly sure that there are not other non-statistical regularities at the same rate of TPs? So with ARC, we try and address these questions by looking at several possible sources of rhythmicities in the stimulus. So we look at acoustic confounds, basically checking that the stimulus itself does not have frequency peak at the word rate. And for that, we will control the envelope spectra of different types of baselines as well. Then we look at the phonological confounds. So even though the acoustics are meshed, there could be other more abstract regularities in the stream, such as phonological features. And we have developed an index to diagnose the rhythmicity of these features. Then we also must look at the statistical regularities that we are manipulating in our paradigm. So these transitional probabilities, we will see that they are actually just theoretical values, and different pseudo-randomization methods can actually yield different actual values of TPs throughout the stream. And finally, we will look at native language confounds, because we know that the linguistic background of our learners can actually influence their ability to learn our artificial language. So as I said, in the second part of this presentation, Nikola will go through our pipeline to generate the streams. And so we will look at all of these functions and their parameters to see exactly how they can be used. Also, we will have a section on how you can navigate the ARC type systems if you want to do some more complicated analysis depending on your purposes, and how to diagnose your stimuli as well. So looking at the acoustic confound, one thing that has already been noted is that there are acoustic regularities in the stimulus itself that confound the TP patterns. And if I just recode the structure stream of syllables by the position that each syllable can take in the stream, we see that for structure streams, syllables can only take fixed positions. And when we look at the envelope spectra, we already see a word frequency peak here at 1.1 hertz. That basically tells us that already in the acoustics, there is an index of the transition at the same rate of TPs. So this could be problematic indeed, because if the peak is already present in the acoustics, we cannot really make very strong inferences about the relevance of the role of statistical learning in using this metric of brain tracking, neural tracking. So what has been developed are baseline streams in which the transitional probabilities now are random. But if we use the commonly used position random baseline, in which syllables can take any positions and they're just shuffled around, then again, the acoustics doesn't have a word rate peak. So again, we are faced with the same problem, that the tracking that we see in structure streams might only be due to the acoustics. Instead, what the Pinto and colleagues have proposed is the use of a position fixed baseline, in which transitional probabilities are still uniform across all syllables in the stream, but syllables are still constrained to occupy the fixed positions. And this again restores the rhythmicity at the TP rate. So this is good because it enables a fair comparison on the level of acoustics between our structure stream with the TP patterns and our random stream in which TPs are uniform. So indeed, our position fixed baseline ensures acoustic control on the stimuli. Now, as I already mentioned, even though we fix the acoustics, we might not be still entirely safe because there could be other short regularities, for instance, phonological features. So phonological features come from phonemes, which are the atomic unit of speech. They are the individual speech sounds. And neurons in the brain are sensitive to the specific sounds of speech. They show hierarchical clustering depending on the phonetic similarities of each phoneme. As this image from Mesgarani and colleagues shows. Here we have different electrodes that from intracranial recordings, and we see the clustering based on phonetic similarity. Now, these phonemes can also be represented as a binary vector of phonological features. So for instance, these are features that can inform us about the articulatory features that we use when we are pronouncing, for instance, a phoneme. And this can be represented as a binary vector of zeros and ones. Now, the brain shows even stronger clustering based on phonological features than phonemes alone. So this means that some neurons in the brain are particularly tuned to specific phonological features. Therefore, if a feature is rhythmic in a stream, it can be tracked easily by these neurons in the brain. And so once again, if this feature is particularly rhythmic at the TP rate, then we might have a problem again when we draw inferences on statistical learning. So we can now represent all phonemes in our stream with these vectors of features. And if we focus now on just one feature, I can show you how we can calculate and quantify the rhythmicity of this feature. So now let's look at the coronal feature. So here we have again our structure stream. I'm marking the transitional probability boundaries, so the word boundaries with blue arrows, and the presence of the coronal feature with black arrows. Now, if we take this little pattern of transitional probabilities and convolve it through the binary feature vector, we see that on some occasions we find a match for which the feature is rhythmic at the same rate of TPs. So this PRI is a good diagnostic tool to assess the feature regularities. Now, the way it would work is just an index, basically, that is ranging between 0 and 1. And the higher this index is, the more of these matches we find. What we can notice here is that we find matches, so we find high PRI when we have two neighboring words that share the exact same features in the same locations within a triplet. So this is true for Bidaku and Golabu that have exactly this pattern that is at the same rate of the TP rate. So how can we prevent now these phonological rhythms? We can essentially check for a given set of pseudo words whether whether minimal pairs of pseudo words would have this sort of feature overlap. And once we generate our lexicons, we then aim to minimize the cumulative feature overlap across all words that are composing our lexicon. And as we can see, our lexicon reduces this cumulative overlap down to 3, whereas our benchmarking lexicon has already a cumulative overlap of 5. So we can generate lexicons that minimize feature overlap. And now I would like to show how this affects the PRI on streams. So basically, we have simulated the different lexicons using the feature control that I will mark in blue, and also lexicons without using the feature control. So essentially, random syllable combinations, and also compare it against the reference lexicons that we have extracted from the literature. For each of these types of lexicons, we generated several streams on all conditions that I've already introduced earlier, and calculated the PRI for all features. I'm focusing now on the maximum PRI across features as the worst case scenario of feature rhythmicity. And what we see is that indeed ARC can produce low PRI values when we use the feature control, and these PRIs are essentially very low for all conditions. So once again, there will be no differences across conditions in PRI. And this is true for the ARC with the feature control on, but if we were not to use the feature control, and additionally we were maybe to use a position random baseline, then it already appears clear that we would have again differences in the PRI between the structure condition and the random condition, which again, this could be very high values as well. So there could be an effect of phonological rhythmicities on the findings in TP structured, but they are not present in TP random. So this constitutes a confound for statistical learning. So moving on to the statistical confound, we should keep in mind that these transitional probabilities are just theoretical values and they can have random fluctuations. So how can we generate our streams with the controlling for TPs? A common strategy is to take our set of pseudo words that form our lexicon, replicate them a number of times, and then shuffle them around. So this will produce a theoretical value of TP of 0.3, given that no word can be repeated consecutively. However, as we can already intuitively see, this is just a theoretical value because the actual values of TPs changes throughout the stream. And these are the actual TP values. So for every transition, we need to update these transitional probabilities. And we can also visualize that as a transition matrix for which each word transitions to each other words, and basically we count how many times it happens. And we see that this matrix is filled unevenly. So what we want to do instead is to avoid these variable Q diagnosticities of our tokens and have a more stationary TP distributions throughout the stream so that we have better values that are closer to our theoretical TP values. And the way we do that is by using a pseudo-random walk approach. So basically, we fill our stream word by word, token by token, and we keep track of this transition matrix. So what we want to do is fill up this matrix as evenly as possible, and we also want to use all words before any word can be repeated twice, so more than the others. So in this case, we want to exhaust the lexicon and then continue. And again, if we ever find moments where randomicity would give us a transition that has already been explored while others have not yet, we will try and correct for it. So of course, we don't correct post hoc, we correct preemptively, but the result is an even transition matrix. And this really reduces the transitional probability variance in our stream. Here I'm plotting the transitional probabilities at every stream location for the shuffling method and for the pseudo-random walk method. And we see that for all types of streams, we can actually achieve a much more precise transitional probabilities throughout the stream. So they will all tend to our theoretical value. How we can stabilize our TPs. And finally, for the native language confound, we just want to point out that there are baseline native language statistics that could bias our artificial language learning. And these statistics would be the syllables frequency of use, phoneme engrams, and positional probabilities. Positional probabilities are the probabilities that a syllable takes a certain position in a real word. And phoneme engrams could be the engram probability of phoneme co-occurrences in a given language. So these factors are ZIF distributed, which means that there are large differences in frequency of use across the tokens in our language. So in our corpus, we can see that the syllable frequency of use ranges between 0 and over 19,000. But only for a few syllables have this high frequency of use values, whereas most of them have a very low frequency value. So what we can do to have a set of syllables that is more or less uniform is to transform these distributions and run them through an uniformity test. And what it does is basically it tells us the distribution of p-values tells us how likely it is for each token to come from a uniform distribution. And if they are very unlikely to come from a uniform distribution, we can decide essentially to remove them from our syllable register, for instance. And now we can drastically reduce the range of frequency of use of the syllables that we will use. So we have decided to use this filter in this way by removing both ends of these distributions, but of course these parameters can be set quite arbitrarily in ARC, as we will see later. So this is just to show that we also provide a way to filter our artificial registers based on linguistic corpora. So as we will see with Nikola, we can do that by taking syllables from the corpus and using their statistics information. Now, we can also generate our stream from top to bottom even without a corpus. We can make syllables based on just a combination of phonemes, because we already provide a list of all international phonemes written in IPA, and these are annotated with their phonological features. So what we do here is basically we have added the information, the annotation on the phonological features on each phoneme. And then the user can simply decide which syllable type they want. For instance, consonant vowel syllable. Here we use the high V, the big V to indicate the long vowels. And then users can again decide for using certain types of controls, like the frequency controls. And this, of course, requires corpus data. So this is how we move from phonemes to syllables. Then to move from syllables to words, we do essentially another function, that is make words. Now we have our syllable register. We can define the word size, and then we can add other specific controls for checking other types of rules, for instance, phonotactic rules. I have not explained these rules in details now, but I have bonus slides if you're interested. So for instance, here we control for neighboring syllables to not have overlap in a place or manner of articulation of their consonant, which is called the obligatory contour principle. And then once we have our set of words, again, we can filter it based on our corpus data. Finally, we want to go from words to lexicons, and here once again all we need to do is define how big we want our lexicons to be and how much overlap in terms of feature repetitiveness we allow. And for that, we can compute, again, I would like to refer to this image to see how we can compute the feature overlap. Here I'm making all feature presence with white boxes again, and see and try to fill the lexicon by minimizing the overlap between minimal pairs of words. So finally, we can make the streams using our pseudo-random walk, and we can define stream duration as a multiple of the lexicon size, and we can use the pseudo-random walk for all types of streams. So for the structure and random stream, it will work. Then we also have scripts for audio synthesis and editing, and for computing envelope structure if you're interested in diagnosing the acoustic peaks. But we will not deal with that in this workshop. So this is just the general pipeline again, and I would like to now hand it over to Nikola for his part of his workshop on the generation of the streams with ARC. Let's have a look at it.
Yeah, thanks, Lorenzo. So before I start, are there questions for Lorenzo? Maybe now would be a good time. I don't know. Okay.
Yeah, I maybe had a question, but I think I'll. Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I had a question, but I think I'll wait until the end of the workshop because I think it might be answered by the workshop. So, but if no one else has questions, you can start. So.
Similar, I was wondering, but you can see, Nikola, if this is a question you'll get into or not. But we sometimes want to generate two streams or two artificial languages that are comparable in some ways. And there I was wondering if you could comment, it can also be later, on what would be the best approach. Would the best approach be to say make it too large of a language in your toolbox, or is there a way to say I want two comparable languages? That's just
yeah, thanks for the question. Yes, there is a way. I also had to do that for my own study. So I had the two different conditions of learning, one with prosody and one without. So for that, I wanted participants to learn both lexicons as they were different languages. And I do have like a way to generate two compatible lexicons that have no syllable overlap and that both have the same controls on the other levels. So we will see also in the workshop how that can be done.
Thanks.
Okay, and then no further questions. Then I'll start with a little demonstration. So can I share now?
Yes, I interrupted. Yeah.
Can you see my screen now? Yes.
Yes.
Oh yes. Okay, so prior to this, you should have received a link to this GitHub, and here this is what I'm going to use now. So it's basically a separate repository with 3 notebooks in Jupyter notebook in Python, and I'm going to run through some parts of this to show you how ARC works. And on your own time, if you're interested, you can of course go through these things in detail, and you can ask us anytime. If there are any issues, you can here on the page, you can open an issue, just create a new issue and write down what the problem is, and then we can sort of sort it out. Or you can of course contact us by email. That's also not an issue. So yeah, let's start. So I basically downloaded this code. You can use Git if you're familiar. Otherwise, you can go to this code thingy here and download the zip file. And I use here Visual Studio Code, but you can use whatever you want. In the README, there is a little bit of information of what you need. You will just need some program that can open Jupyter notebooks to run this tutorial. Yeah, so let's get right into it. So here's a little bit of an instruction how to install ARC. So ARC is basically a Python library that you can install using pip, the Python's package manager. So you would just run this. I already ran it, so I'm not going to run it again. And this will install Arc on your system. And then you can basically start generating your artificial language. So this is, I'm going to start with a very high level sort of introduction. So what Arc provides is basically hidden away functionality. So where you can just execute all the steps until you get the stream without really having to do any of the details. So by default, Arc will control for everything that Lorenzo mentioned out of the box, and it will use for the language-specific controls. It will use a German corpus, but you can, of course, then I mean, this library is still under development. If you're interested, we can also include other languages, and you can also do some of these things yourself. But I will show you later how to. So here in this cell, you see the three functions you need to create words. So if you just run it, this will take a couple of seconds. So first we generate phonemes. So this will be a collection of phonemes that are already controlled to be. So what we saw in in these statistical regularities slide in Lorenzo's talk. So we'll already check that it's common in German, but not too common. Then the next function will create the syllables based on these phonemes. So these are just collections of syllables. And then in the end, you will have a collection of words, and you can decide how many you want to have and so on. So each of these functions has a help function, so you can use Python's help functionality to get some information about which options you have in creating the words. And that's basically it for now. I will go a little bit into the details of what these objects do and so on. But here you would just take the words that you created, put that into the function make lexicons, and again, it will do its thing and control automatically for the word-wise overlap inside the lexicon. And I didn't plan to do this now, but because the question came up. So when you run the help on the make lexicons function, you will see also some options that you have. And if you create more than one lexicon, let's say I have here n lexicons 2 that I want to create, and set unique words to true, then you will basically get 2 unique lexicons. They will not be sampled individually. They will basically, the generation will keep track of which words have already been used for generation, and this is a way you can get 2 compatible lexicons, so lexicons that are controlled in the same way but don't have the same words in them or syllables. Okay, so that's it for the question. I hope that answered the question about the compatible lexicons. And
can I ask a question about that? Sorry.
Of course. Sorry, I don't see the.
So they are. But oh, it's okay. No, but so you can generate 2 lexicons then, but they are generated with the same rules, but they are not like they don't. How can I say this? They're not controlled like together. I mean, they're just both created from the same rules. I mean,
they're both created from the same rules, exactly. And usually, so by default, they will just be treated completely independently. They will just use the same rules.
Yeah.
If you set unique words to true, then there will be a check sort of at creation of, let's say, the second lexicon that we haven't used these words yet. So this is basically just on this level. Of course, if you have suggestions on what else could be done, we are happy to discuss this. Yeah, so that's exactly what this function is.
Yeah, maybe I can also comment on that because, for instance, I don't know if there are also different types of tasks to assess the learning afterwards. So one could use, for instance, the 2AFC to check for words versus foils and things like that. And we have not included the generation of foils in this toolbox, but I do have also code for creating foils that are still have the same characteristics of words. I've also maximized the Levenstein distance with the real words, so to make them all like still consistent in some properties. But it was actually a lot of extra computation, and because the different tasks can be used as well, we have not included it in the toolbox now. But if you want, I mean, depending on what your purposes are, we can also discuss about it. Thanks.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, cool. Then let's keep going with this one. Okay, so I will just quickly show you. I will go into the details of these collections of words and so on. But here, just you can also read this if you're interested in a little bit of details on how this function works. This might be interesting for some. But here you can have we can take a look at what these, for example, a lexicon that comes out of this function, what it provides. It gives you the lexicon itself as a string, but it also gives you a little bit of information of how good the lexicon was or how successful the creation was. So you can see two things, especially the cumulative feature repetitiveness. So that's the name we gave it here, but basically just the pairwise overlap that Lorenzo introduced earlier. That's just the first thing is the accumulated over the whole lexicon, how much could we achieve actually, how much independence, and then the second one tells you how much pairwise overlap we were able to achieve at the maximum. This might be useful information to know how good the lexicon itself is before we keep using it to generate a stream. And now the last step would be to take the lexicons and generate streams based on them. These again, you can use the help function to see which options you have. So let's generate a stream. The stream generation takes a little bit longer. Now it doesn't take so long because I've turned off one extra check. You can, for example, set the maximum rhythmicity you want. This is a check that makes the function a bit slower, you will notice. But perhaps you don't need that. So let's take like out one of the streams. You can do it by like if you used Python before, you can just treat it as a list, basically. So we take out one element and we can look at the stream. What we can also do is, I will show you later how to do this. You can also look at all kinds of information that the stream provides. So you can see which transition probability mode has been used to generate it. So what Lorenzo explained earlier, how this TP transition probability structure has been controlled. There are these three modes: the random, the position controlled, and word structured. And you can also see, and which is sort of the main feature, the feature PRIs of the stream. So for each feature that is present in any of the syllables, you can see how rhythmic it is with respect to the word rate, or what Lorenzo showed in these rhythmicities that we computed. And we noticed that usually like values below 0.1 are pretty good, and sometimes so difficult to achieve by other means. So yeah, this is what kind of ARC can provide for you. So this is sort of the high level how you would use it to get from start to finish. So all you have to do is call these basically. I will jump back. So call these 5 functions in row and sort of put them into each other, and at the end of this process you get a collection of streams. So yeah, Lorenzo, did I miss anything from the did you notice something from the high level kind of thing?
No, I think one thing that maybe we could mention is that, of course, if we have lexicons of different sizes or words also more than 3 syllables, then the control that we do on the feature rhythmicity will be based on this size of the words. So because of course, so that's already implemented automatically. Like if we have words of 4 syllables, then that's our unit to check rhythmicity of features on. So yeah.
Yeah, so that's also one of the reasons maybe why you would want to generate the streams in this stepwise fashion, so you can see how your words look and so on, and you can control basically when you create the words. For example, let's take a look at the words here. Let's see. So at the word level, there's a lot of features, but for example, you can set the number of syllables that you want, and based on that, this will of course influence everything that comes after. So it's maybe good to have control of the individual steps. Okay, so if there's nothing more about the higher level, then I would maybe go a little bit into the details. Okay, so at the end, so at the sort of the third notebook, which would be also interesting for you, we are going to look at how to use your own data. So if you have a lexicon, maybe you want to read it into the ARC system to use it further to generate streams, or you can diagnose your own stream in the sense that you can sort of evaluate how it does with respect to our PRI metrics and so on. Before we dive into that, I thought it might be useful to have sort of an overview of how ARC works and what you can do with it. We try to make it as flexible as possible. So in the second notebook, if you have the code and want to check it out, there's a lot more explained about how ARC works and what the principles are, and you can go through it if you're interested. But what I'm going to show here, in the interest of time, is a short summary of what functions you have available, which might be useful to sort of shuffle data around. So here I'm going to create words again from the beginning, and this will take a second because we have to check all the words against each other. So one particularly interesting thing, for example, because word generation might take a while, depending on the options that you provide, you can save them to a file. This might be useful. I don't know why that took so long. This will, here in this case, this will be saved to a results folder. It's just a JSON. It can be read again. So maybe it might also be interesting to have. Yeah, there's also a load function from load. Yeah, you can choose what you want to load. You can load the words, for example. Let's just check that out so you have the full picture. Load words, and then you can should be able to get them out again. So you can print them so they might look pretty. Okay, so you have your words back. So it can be quite useful to store a certain collection of words for later. What's also quite useful is when you have a collection of syllables, you can store them in speech synthesis markup language, so you can use them later as a reference to create the sounds or to create the audio streams for your streams. What might also be useful is if you have too many words, let's say, or too many syllables, and some of the functions run too slowly for you, you can always get a subset, a random one. That might be quite useful, but you can also implement that yourself if you want. What's also useful is you can iterate through the elements as usual in Python. So for word in words, you can use things like that. You can access each element by a sort of its keyword, and you might be wondering, like, why is this interesting here? If you don't print it, you will see sort of this whole object laid out. So it's actually the string, but it also has a bunch of other info that will be interesting for later. So for example, it has these binary features which will be used to calculate the feature or the word-wise overlap inside a lexicon. This is just an interesting sort of side thing. And here, this is just for you as a reference if you're interested later of how these objects work and what you can do with them. So we try to make them as convenient as possible. So you can always take, let's say, a word. So in this case, Nikola, and iterate through the syllables if you need to. You can also print the info of each element, be it a syllable or a phoneme or a word, to see what's hidden behind if you're interested, if you want to know this. For example, syllables do have their binary features. They also have these phonotactic features that Lorenzo explained, and they also have frequency and probability information with respect to the corpus that they are coming from. And here's also a little bit of a summary of what else you can do if you're interested. And another useful function might be to get the lower level things out of the higher level things. So let's say if you have a collection of words, but you want to split it up automatically and give you the syllables that are contained, you can do this with the flatten function. And yeah, what is this? Oh yeah, this is the intersection. This might be quite interesting. So let's say you load a corpus. This is also just a collection of syllables in this case. Here I made half of it just to demonstrate what happens when you have sort of a subset, and you can intersect sort of certain syllables with another set of syllables, and you will get sort of their intersection. This might be quite useful because this intersection will take information from both if there's information available. So for example, here we get all the information that's contained also in the corpus. So for example, it's frequency information. So yeah, this is really for you to dive in if you want to use ARC for something more complicated. Now we're going to use some of these functions here for reading in your own data, but we try to make it as accessible as possible, so you won't hopefully need to use much of these functions yourself. So the last thing I want to talk about is how to use your own data. So there are two cases that we want to discuss. The first one is if you have a lexicon and you want to load it in our type system. So here, let's say you have a raw lexicon. So you have strings of syllables. So the only thing that we require is that it is presented in this form. So you have a list of lists, and the inner lists are the words, and the outer list is the lexicon. And you can use the toLexicon function to read that in, and you will get a ARC-based object that has all the functionality. The only thing that might be a bit annoying is that at this point we have only two types of syllables that we can provide this for if you want to use this. Otherwise, you would have to write it yourself. But here you have the C small v syllable type and the small big V. The big V would just mean you can have long vowels at the end. Small v is just short vowels, and we also allow diphthongs here at this point. So you can just run this and you will get this lexicon object with all its features and so on. And then you can keep using it as before. So you can put that into the syllable, into the stream generation, get a stream out, hopefully. So again, stream generation may take a couple of seconds. So let's say, yeah, that's just a summary. So let's say we take one out and print some interesting info. So let's say we have the word structured stream. So we generated basically a stream based on your lexicon, and you can see all these features and so on. Okay.
So, you have a question, Nikola?
Yeah, I was just curious because you said there's an option.
question.
There's an option for long vowels and for short vowels, but does that then basically adjust the length of the consonant? Because I'm assuming that you're keeping things similar or not? Is it just a syllable has a certain length, but then what's taken by the consonant versus vowel is shifted?
Yeah, we were thinking about making this as flexible as possible, but we noticed that things get out of hand very quickly when you allow for more options in this case. So we try to keep it as simple as possible, so that at this point you can only have a single character consonant at the beginning and a long or short vowel at the end. We keep it sort of open as to how we could extend this if you have other needs. But we noticed that in the literature, most lexicons are built like this. So yeah.
So if I can comment also on that, so the reasons to have only long vowels, for instance, is exactly to not have to change then the duration of consonants according to how long the vowel is, because of course that would create some troubles then when we are editing our audios, because consonants and vowel might have different durations. So yeah, we decided to use only long vowels because we have plenty in German, but yeah, one could also use just short, or even if they are not interested in it and they have a sophisticated algorithm to just control for the length separately for consonants and vowels in the same audio file. I mean, it's also free to be used in that way.
But yeah, if you have sort of specific needs for this, we are happy to have a chat about it and to include some extra functions in ARC. Okay, so now one sort of special thing that you might want to do, which is not sort of default functionality, but might be quite interesting, is if you have a lexicon, let's say, you want to move in the other direction, sort of move back and split it up into these other objects that ARC provides, like phonemes and syllables. This is already done in the background, but you might be missing some information about the corpus, let's say, because the syllables and phonemes that appear in your lexicon, we don't know much. So from ARC's perspective, we don't know much about what this is going to be, from which language they come, and so on. So what you can do is, yeah, we already did the stream generation. So what you can do is use this flatten function that we introduced earlier. So you can, for example, look at the syllables and then use this intersection thing that they introduced earlier to compare to our corpus. So what this will actually do is create a collection of syllables from your lexicon and take our corpus syllables that we provide and sort of see which ones are also in there. This is probably likely if you have the same specifics, like if you have this CV structure, that it's also present in the corpus. And then you can use the information from the corpus, for example, to see how likely is the syllable to appear in the German language, if you're interested. Okay, and you can of course do this with the others also, so you can get phonemes from syllables and so on. Yeah, we noticed for our purposes that this might be quite useful. Okay, then the last thing, if you have your own stream, so we just create here one from, I just basically took the lexicon here, flattened it out, and then sort of copied and pasted it to have the same length as our streams. And we have this random stream, and we want to check its features, its rhythmicity in the indices and so on. So all you have to do is put it into toStream. It just has to be a list essentially, and we can generate a stream immediately and get all these features out. And yeah, we notice this might also be an interesting thing to have. Okay, and this concludes the presentation of this toolbox and how you can use it. Yeah, happy to take your questions if there's anything further. So yeah, thanks.
Thank you for the presentation. Does anyone have any questions? Or
Go ahead, Gustav, if you have one.
Oh yeah. The only thing that I've tried the toolbox a little bit and I kind of like it. I think it's very nice. The only thing that I think is a bit of a hassle is getting corpuses that are not included in there, because I wanted to get like a Dutch corpus and I looked a bit. There is the CLX and but it's not in the right format. CLX, then you have the Dutch like spoken language corpus, I think, which is a very big one. And I'm not very familiar with corpus, working with corpuses. So that was a bit of a hassle for me, and I couldn't really figure it out so far.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's it. Sorry.
Yeah, that's a great point. We were thinking about this a lot, how we could make this as easy as possible for people. But it's really hard to foresee what the corpus would look like if people have one and so on. So we decided to leave this sort of for the community to decide, or for us together on how to include it, and we can also do it together. Right, Lorenzo? We can at some point. The question is, do we really want this as a sort of an automatic functionality, or is it enough to just work together to include it as default in the same way that German, for example, is included? It would also probably make sense if a large part of the community uses the Dutch language, for example. So yeah, we are happy to discuss this in the future. I think that,
yeah, because that's really the only thing to me that makes it a bit difficult to work with. It's just the corpus. The other stuff is pretty clear to me. I think it's very nice. And you also could use save the lexicons as JSON. You said, or
yes. So all these objects are basically both using these serializable objects. So it doesn't matter what you do. If you don't get an error in creating one of these objects, you can always also store it as a JSON. It's kind of guaranteed. And that's kind of useful for documentation or whatever, I think.
Yeah, I thought it was also nice because if you want to use like online experiments, then you can just import the JSON as well.
I had a question about the native language, the idea, right, that there could be content on native language. And if I understood correctly, for now you're looking only at the frequency of individual syllables, right? Not at the concurrence of 2 syllables in a word. Is that correct?
More or less, we look at also phoneme co-occurrences up to 3 grams, because that's what we had in our corpus. So yeah, I only use the example on syllables, frequency of use, but the other 2 plots we're looking at phoneme B grams and 3 grams. So it does go a little bit beyond the syllable range, so it can also straddle syllabic boundaries and look more at the word level.
Okay, cool. So then basically if, say, a co-occurrence of 2 syllables would make a very infrequent phoneme co-occurrence, then it would probably not select either that non-word, that non-word, because it will select the transition always. Yeah.
Exactly. Yes. So it is a check that runs on the words at this point because they go beyond the syllables. And for syllable co-occurrences, we didn't have a corpus. So for 2 syllables, for instance, together. And but yes, what we did is also to check actually at that point with the native language speakers if 2 syllables occurring together are maybe already a word in the language, part of a word, if they evoke like this these other types of controls. I mean, we could theoretically also cross-check the lexicons that we generate with the word corpus, for instance. It's something that we haven't thought about yet, or we haven't done yet, but in principle, it should work kind of the same way. It's just a little bit more difficult to find parts of words in there, but yes.
Because now this is just like thought, of course, the person generating the stream hopefully knows the language that they're generating it for. But in principle, right, I could now generate a stream that would have words in Dutch, and it wouldn't at any point warn me about that, right? Because it's not linked at all. It only knows about German words.
Yes, it actually only knows about not even German words. I think just German syllables for now, and phoneme co-occurrences, and positional probabilities of the phonemes in German words.
Okay, but for now, it would probably not select German words because you told it that it shouldn't be super frequent, the phoneme co-occurrences. Yeah, so but if you would change that setting, it would start generating words. Yeah.
it might generate words as well, yes. And that's why, I mean, it's still important to use it in combination with some human controlling it at this point.
Yeah.
Can you then use it to make like more word-like stimuli and less word-like stimuli, or is that not how it works? So
yeah, in principle, I mean, if we look at trigrams, for instance, that have quite enough range, yes, one could have could look for words that are on maybe more like one end on the distribution on trigram probabilities for phonemes, and see that maybe they would be more likely to have like sounds that are very common than in German, and maybe sound more like word-like for real German speakers. Of course, this is also a trade-off, because the control of using basically only long vowels already restricts our search space a lot, and then it's very unlikely to find a German word that has a consonant vowel syllable, 3 consonant vowel syllables, all with long vowels, it already makes it unlikely. But in principle, looking at phoneme co-occurrences and their probability in a corpus can already give you sort of an indication of how similar to a word it is. Additionally, the positional probabilities are another factor that can essentially tell you how similar it would be to find this set of phonemes in a word in those positions. So this works similarly to the Spanish similarity index that Varela and colleagues have used in the recent publication. So basically, it's exactly the same. You give a corpus and you check phoneme by phoneme how likely it is that the phoneme can take this position in the real words.
thank you. Are there any more questions?
Maybe just on the theoretical level, I'm curious because all of the controls that you implemented are also with EEG in mind, right? And really this neural signature. So what would you think, like what is really important for all studies in how you think about it, behavioral or neural, and what is, because I could imagine that some of the rhythmicity could also just affect behavioral effects, right? If something has a rhythmic thing to it, maybe that's also what helps us to learn. I mean, that's at least what some people would claim. But where do you think it should absolutely, which steps are absolutely critical for any experiment, and which ones are critical when you're doing neural tracking, neural entrainment studies only?
Yes, so the use of the specific baseline is probably for the acoustic level, it's maybe something that is more relevant only for entrainment studies, let's say, but we see already how it has implications also on the level of phonological regularities, because we see that if you use a certain type of baseline or another type of baseline, and in combination with the feature control, then you get different rhythmicity values for the features. So if you use the random baseline, you get very low rhythmicities, no matter what your feature controls are. But if you use the position fixed baseline and the structure streams, then they have much different phonological rhythmicity values. And I think this particular confound could actually also be relevant for behavioral studies. If we have the same type of sound repeating, like only plosives repeating at fixed positions, they might abstract the fact that it's a plosive at word onset, that and that could be an additional cue for just learning words or segmenting even outside of the neuroimaging part. For the transitional probabilities, I think that's also a factor that could be relevant essentially for all statistical learning studies, even beyond linguistic studies, because it's a property, it's a statistical property of the stimulus. So even when we have visual sequences, I mean, the fact that some transitions are more likely than others, it's something that maybe we want to avoid at all times. And yes, then of course the native language is also a type of confound that can affect, of course, behavioral level, because if you have some phoneme combinations that are very well known given your linguistic background, then you're much more likely to learn them, maybe. There were also mixed behavioral findings on that, on like whether it creates competition or it facilitates, but definitely it has an impact on the behavioral learning abilities. So basically, actually, almost all of them. I mean, I use the neuroimaging as a reference because that's how we thought of generating the stimuli. We generate them with that purpose in mind in the beginning. And but yes, it also applies to actually more behavioral statistical learning.
Yeah, I think statistical confound is actually pretty scary if you think about all the past research that just they don't often like explain how they randomize. The randomization is often just no repeating words. So it's I think it's a little scary. But,
They also only looked at the learning outcome usually, right? So if in the end, despite all fluctuations, it ends up with a TP difference, I guess it would be way more problematic if they had online measures but didn't say anything about randomization. You could imagine that in the end, you still get a similar amount of information, just in a very not uniformly distributed way. But it can definitely impact learning when you get the information.
Yes, so for online measures, for sure, this incremental TPs is relevant. But what we noticed also checking existing streams used in the prior literature is that even, especially when these streams don't have such long duration, and we are just shuffling and pseudo randomization, even at the end of it, we don't end up with a cumulative TPs that are close enough to our theoretical value. So even that, I mean, I noticed it by just reading paper and say, yes, our TPs are this value, and then you check and they are not really. But it's hard. I mean, it's to come up with a strategy that can fix it, because there are classical random walks approaches that usually require some warm up, and then we'll create a sequence that tends to that theoretical value based on the TP distribution that you provide, that you want. But also they work with large data. So with many repetitions, then they will tend to that value. And if we have limited time, we need to come up with a strategy to sort of have this check constantly, basically. And this is what we with the pseudo random walk.
About the TPs, another question, because for now it's assuming that words have a TP of 1, right? So that syllables within a word always have a TP of 1, and there's a lot of criticism on the statistical learning literature that this is an extreme oversimplification, because of course in real language syllables are shared between words. And so my expectation is that people might start using not fully regular languages. Is there an option already, or would it be relatively easy to modify the toolbox allowing for different transitional probabilities within word?
I think it's relatively doable because of the way we do the randomization at the level of position fixed baselines. So what we do there is that basically every syllable is fixed to its position. This means that this first syllable, there could be 4 syllables in first position, there could be 4 syllables in second position, or 4 syllables in third position. Now what I do is that I try to transition from subsets evenly, but one could even do that the transitions from the first syllable position to the second are biased. and also from the second to the third are slightly biased. And then at boundaries, it's fully as low as possible, so that all transitions are represented. So this way, in principle, one could actually make a more naturalistic like experiment. It will require some slight changes, but actually I think not even, I mean, the structure is there. Now, that particular portion of the code, which is also the one that Nikola mentioned runs the slowest, is because it's still the original code that I made, so might not be super intuitive now to look into. But yes, if interested, we can also have a look at that in particular, and then see if there are questions come up or there is not so much clarity in the code itself. We can also have a look at where these probabilities are accounted for, what these transitions are made.
Cool. And then maybe just to comment on Christophe's experience earlier about the corpus, I think what might be useful, because it's not very feasible that you have to go out and, you know, make sure that your code works with any corpus in any language. That's not going to work, but maybe there could be something like an effort where people list the corpora that are compatible, and where you do have it, for example, for English or for some of the large languages, so that people see basically like how can it be adjusted, and there's a few examples of corpora that are working, and that then people can basically submit, like if Christophe spent time and found a corpus that is, or even extracted from an existing corpus, things like syllable frequencies and these phoneme co-occurrence things, that is the only thing it needs, right? So maybe people could even like contribute their syllable corpus for a given language, and then I think it would make it way more feasible for, say, a PhD student, because a PhD student trying to make an artificial stream is not trying to get to corpus land, right? Like, so I'm thinking there, what could be like a nice way to make it easier, because I do think my intuition is that many people will try and use it with this native language problem in mind as well, because that's now a big criticism when you're submitting your artificial language studies. So that was just a thought.
Yeah, okay. So would you think that already making the function to read the corpus a bit more accessible could already help a bit? Because essentially our corpus that we are using, it is a comma-separated file, like a table, where some columns are relevant. They are the ones for like the frequency of use, the concurrencies, and the first column is usually just the phoneme, syllable, or token that we're interested in. So it's really a 2 columns file table.
Which you extracted, Lorenzo, from an existing corpus, but
yes.
It's in a specific format, right? It's not an existing German corpus that you can download.
Exactly. So for the syllables, it's actually an existing corpus. It is the Bavarian corpus of spoken German, conversational German, and they already had basically these summary statistics in these table files. So I just took that essentially and then read it in, and yes, of course, to read it in, you have to find the keywords, or maybe just give hard code the column that you need to load in. So I don't know how accessible that that function is, Nikola, in Arc. If we can show how we read the corpus somehow.
I think it's still a bit ugly. So I think we didn't anticipate it, but we can make it a bit nicer. That's no problem. Yeah.
Yeah, or just for the user, like how many people would use the toolbox? I think if at least it had English, as you could set it, say, to German versus English, that might already help lots of, I mean, our request would be Dutch, but that's like a small subset, although with Nijmegen and us, maybe there are enough people using it. But like if there was, I think that could be helpful that there's, and also make people aware that the toolbox is otherwise functioning in German, right? Which might also be missed. So maybe that's something, if I imagine that these statistics that you need are available for spoken English.
Yes, we can have a look at that. And also we can have a look at the Dutch as well, because I'm sure that, of course, there is probably needed also by researchers in this field. Like there is a lot of studies also in Dutch. Yes, I think still that it is something that probably has to go on, has to be done on a case by case basis, basically. So every time we see that some researchers want to do it based on Portuguese, we have to see how this corpus looks like, and then of course we can have maybe a better idea of how you can load it in, because we already did it for German. We can try for English. But and then once, as you suggested, once we have a few examples, it might be even more automatic for new users to just see what it could be that you have to load in, and then they could also do it on their own. But yes, thank you.
Would it be okay if well, I'm back in August, but if I just send you the if I share the corpus, and we could maybe figure it out together to how to do it, or? Yes.
Yes, I mean, we can also have a chat. And now you're on holidays, right? So yeah, we can talk also depending on your time constraints for this generation when it would be easiest to do it, because I will be off then in August, so it's, it's a little bit.
Yeah.
But we can have a chat about that, sure. Yeah.
Okay.
But having the corpus already would be quite useful. So
yeah,
you already sent it to us, that we could already take a look at it.
Yeah. Okay.
Right. Any other questions?
No. Once, twice. Okay.
No.
So then I want.
Then
Would,
yeah, sorry. Yeah.
No, you can say.
No. I just wanted to thank you again for the invitation, and say that it's really great to see so much excitement around ARC. We weren't expecting it, and we are happy if you decide to use it, of course, but also if you find it helpful. And really, like, we are also here to try and make it accessible and improve it, and see whether it can really also speak to your purposes.
I actually think that a lot of people would be willing to use it if it is like easy to use, because it's a real time saver, I think. And it's also something standardized that if everyone would use it, we know that it's like, you know, based on the same principles. Yeah.
Yes. The goal is also to have more consistency in stimulus development. But yeah.
Okay. Thank you a lot for again for coming, for taking the time to help us figure this out, I guess. So yeah. Yeah. I don't know how to close. I don't know how to close this. So like, do we now say goodbye or?
Goodbye.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Goodbye.
Bye.
Thank
Thank
you.
you very much.
Thanks.
Bye.